Hi, everyone. Let's give people a few more minutes to join. We're just giving people a minute or two to join in. Shall we go ahead and get started? Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Automatic SIP Trunking and Pairing Working Group session at IETF 110. I'm Jean Mahoney, and my co-chair, Gonzalo. You want to say hey?
Hey, Jean, can everyone hear me okay? Jean, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yes.
Great. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
All right. We have confirmation that one of the participants could hear us. All right. You want to go ahead and move the slides?
Can you see them now? You should be able to see the title slide.
Yes, I can.
Great.
All right. Here's the note well. This is a reminder of IETF policies with regard to such things as patents and code of conduct. Lots of information here that's linked to at the bottom. Please be aware by participating in the IETF, you agree to the following IETF processes and policies. Next slide. All right, so some info on how we're going to be running the session. So any decisions that we make will be confirmed on the mailing list. The meeting is being recorded. If you are at the mic, please use headphones when speaking to cut out issues such as echo. If you would like to speak, click the hand icon and I will identify you, and then you will click the mic icon so you can speak. At least I think that's the way it works. This is my first time hosting a session online. Gonzalo will be presenting the slides. We've got some resources here on how to work with these working group sessions down at the bottom if you need help with working with MeetEcho. So next. All right, a few things to go over. So there is a Jabber room, although the chat room here with the MeetEcho session is the same thing. We would like a Jabber scribe. Keep an eye out on the conversations, raise issues. Is there somebody who's willing to perform that role? Anyone? I guess type in the chat room if you're interested. So I'm not seeing anybody jumping in. I guess Gonzalo, can you keep an eye out on the chat room?
I sure can. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
relay anything that comes up in the chat room that's meaningful.
Okay. So the next thing would be minutes takers. Any takers for taking minutes? You can type things along in CodeMD. Multiple people can work on the notes simultaneously, lightens the load. Is there anyone who's willing to take minutes? Just high-level stuff, action items. So I see in the chat room we have a question, is there anybody actually here? So I have a participants list of 23 people. So I see some people who are not just chairs, ADs, or MeetEcho.
So it looks like we've had two volunteers. Costa, who's one of the co-authors, he's willing to, while he's not speaking, he's willing to take minutes, and Marc Petit-Huguenot is also willing to take notes.
Oh, cool. Thank you very much. And again, you could use a CodeMD, or if you would like to take notes offline and send them to the chairs separately, that also works. We're good with either. All right, next slide. Okay, well, I think we have taken care of the administrivia. We have one presentation today, and then wrap up and next steps. So any agenda bashing? All right, well, let's continue on to the presentation. So I think at this point, the presenters enter the queue and then they're allowed to talk. There we go. So Srikanth, just click your mic and video icons and you should be good to go.
Hey, Jean, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, that's great. All right. So thanks. Thanks everyone for joining the meeting. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the agenda. We can go to the next slide. Okay, great. So, right. So for the benefit of those who are new here and, for whom ASAP is a new thing and haven't had a chance to go through the draft, I just wanted to cover the problem in a couple of minutes that we're trying to solve here. We presented this back in IETF 106, so it's been some time, and I thought this would be a good refresher. So yeah, so today administrators usually when deploying their SBC or any other equipment that peers with the service provider and they're setting up the SIP trunk, they have a tedious job of fixing interoperability issues and things that should take them just a couple of minutes end up taking them a few hours and even a few days, in fact. And they end up having to open service requests with vendor equipment manufacturers as well as the service provider in order to get these problems fixed. So what we're trying to do is to bring that pain down and just get SIP calls up and running in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Right. So the first thing we need to find out was, how big is the problem, right? So we went back to our support cases on the Cisco Cube, which is Cisco's enterprise SBC, and we found out that around 22% of the cases directly relate to ITSP interoperability issues. So Cisco is just one of the SBC manufacturers here. There are many of them in the market. So you can imagine how many service requests are getting created, how many problems are there that need to be solved. So it's quite a lot there. And apart from that, you also have a significant number of enterprises that are still on analog and digital telephony and are gradually moving on to SIP trunks, right? So this problem isn't going to go away. We're going to see this problem, for the next few years at least. Next slide, please. Right. So I quickly wanted to walk through the high-level overview of what the draft proposes. So for the purpose of this diagram, we've got an enterprise SBC that's sitting right in the center and a capability server that's sitting on the service provider network. So the capability, SBC will send a HTTP, well-formed GET request to the capability server, and the capability server will respond with the required document to the SBC. And once it gets that document, it's going to either automatically parse that and configure itself, or an administrator can manually parse that and configure the SBC in order to get the SIP calls working. So that's a quick overview of what the draft proposes. Next slide, please. Right. So what's inside that capability set document? A representation in XML of a Yang model that's being proposed in the draft. We're still not sure whether we're going with the XML or the JSON, right? So right now we're just representing this in XML, but the final call is yet to be taken. And as you can see here, we are covering various facets of the call setup process. What are the transport characteristics that are required for the call? What are the media requirements for the call? What does the service provider support? And as well as cases where the enterprise and the service provider, let's say they want to do SIP over TLS and SRTP, there are settings for that as well. Next slide, please. Right. So the story so far. So versions 1 and 2 we published before we presented at IETF 106. And at the dispatch meeting at IETF 106, we had a consensus to form a mini working group. And last year, we got a charter proposed, which was approved, as well as the work group that was formed late last year in August of 2020. Next slide, please. Right. So I just wanted to quickly go through the various changes that the draft has undergone over the last year. So versions 1 and 2, like I mentioned, they were the initial draft, just a name change and some formatting issues that were fixed. In version 3, we added the cert location field to the capability set. This is for deployments where the enterprise and the service provider want to do SIP over TLS, and you need the required configuration for that. So that comes under the cert location field. Next slide, please. In version 4, we added the num range field. So the num range field basically specifies the DID number range that's allocated to the enterprise network by the service provider. and it can be communicated as a list of values, as a block or a reference. Next slide. Right, and then we come to the latest version. So in the latest version, we clarified, whatever HTTP versions that are supported, which is version 1.1 and above. We also defined the scope of the work in the draft. So basically, we do not include any low-level details such as IP addressing scheme and the net access network infrastructure. So that part is not covered by the draft. The draft is just about how do you get SIP calls working with RTP between the enterprise and the service provider. And then we also added a paragraph that clarifies on how the workflow is going to work in case you have an intermediate service provider between the enterprise and the service provider. Because what we've observed is if you have an enterprise that's trying to peer with, let's say, service provider ABC, often that connection goes via a service provider XYZ. So we've just covered that particular scenario as well in the draft and how the workflow has to adapt to that. Next slide, please. Right. So this brings me to the open issues that are yet to be finalized upon in the draft. So one was the XML or the JSON representation for the capability set. Another very important aspect is the discovery of the capability server, which is sitting in the service provider network. We would like this to be an automated process instead of having the administrator go ahead and configure that on the SBC and point that towards the capability server. We would like this to be an automated process. So, for example, WebFinger is one of the frameworks that can be used here for the discovery. And we wanted to ask to the larger group if there are any other parameters that needed to be added to the capability set, and if there are any modifications that are required in the draft. We got a review today from Mark, which was really helpful. It had like two specific parameters that he was talking about, which related to the duration, the validity of that capability document, and also whether we're going to add a stir specific section. So I think those are two really good points that he raised. Thanks, Mark. And we will address those in the upcoming versions of the draft. And if you've noticed that the capability set encompasses all of the vendor agnostic parameters that we really think are important to get SIP calls working. But we are definitely open to hearing from the larger group on anything that we've missed and anything that would be more helpful to make this a more seamless process. And finally, I just wanted to ask the group if this draft is good now to be adopted by the working group as well. Yeah. Thanks, Jean. Thanks, Gonzalo. That's all I had.
Right, thank you. All right, so queue is open. If anybody wants to come to the mic with any questions or comments, raise your hand. I am not seeing anyone entering the queue. I'm not seeing anything in the chat room. So I'm curious as to how many people have read the draft. I'm going to try the show of hands tool. So I will type the question in and send it to the session. Start session. Okay, I'm going to end the session. I assume that if you have read the draft, you have raised your hand.
Hey, Gene, I don't see the show hands tool. Let me stop sharing and see if that helps.
Huh. Did, let's see. Oh, so in the chat room, I hear got nothing for hand showing.
Yeah.
So some people were able to show their hands. So shall I? It sounds like I maybe need to run this again, and I can do that. So it looks like not everybody got to see the show of hands tool when I started the show of hands session. Let me try this again. So I'm going to click the show of hands tool, which is this bar chart icon, and I will start a session. So what displays for me,
I see it now, Gene.
okay.
Yeah.
So if people are not seeing a have you read the draft question, I guess add something to the chat room. And I'm getting better numbers this time. So yeah, let us know in the chat room if you're having issues with this. I'll give it a moment or two more. Okay. So I guess it's showing both of the raise hands. I should have disambiguated them. So the one with the higher number of raised hands was the second one that I ran. So 9 people have said they've read the draft. So I guess at this point we can ask the second question. So I'm going to do another raise hands as soon as I can type the question in. So you should now see a second question. Should the working group adopt the draft as a working group item? Oh, wait, somebody said maybe, oh, we have John Peterson in the queue. Sorry,
Yeah,
John, let me, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, is there an alternative? Like, I mean, if this work item, right? And like, I mean, it's kind of academic. It's important that people read it, but I think enough people say they read it. Nobody's squawking about it. I mean, we just need to do this, right?
This is true. There is not another alternative unless somebody stands up and says, hey, I got another draft. But we will be confirming this decision on the mailing list. I note that the draft does, as the Shrikant pointed out, there are still open issues that need to be worked on. So there's some stuff to do. What I see here is that We've got 8 people have, well, we should be voting like this, but there is support for adopting the draft, and we will confirm this on the list. Is there any other comments or questions? Anybody like to come to the queue? Costa, please go ahead.
Hi, am I audible? Hello? Hello?
We can hear you, Costa.
Okay, great. I just wanted to tie back into the point that Shrikant raised with regards to STIR. I mean, I think all of us the co-authors basically feel that STIR, from the perspective of enterprise and service provider networks, is going to play a pivotal role, and we must have something that is specific to STIR as far as this framework and this draft is concerned. However, at this point in time, there are a lot of aspects of STIR that are yet to be finalized. So, for example, stuff that's specific to rich call data, delegate certificates, and things like that. So, I think there's some vector of dependency over there, and as and when some of the STIR stuff goes towards standardization, I think we can incorporate elements of that into the ASAP effort. But from the perspective of fleshing out a framework and a draft that has all elements to it that are required from an enterprise to service provider SIP trunking scenario, we definitely feel that something related to STIR would be of great importance. So I just wanted to highlight that aspect as well.
Thank you. Mark, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, probably. Yes, just to respond to what was just said about STIR. I think that it's true that we are far from having a mechanism for a delegated certificate in STIR, but it does not prevent to start doing the work in this draft. And then a solution, if at the time where this draft is ready, but STIR is still do not have all the mechanism in place, we can split it and do an extension separately. But I don't think that prevent to start doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you. Costa, would you like to say something more? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to just say that I kind of agree with what Mark brought up. So we'll basically see how the STIR effort pans out and the timelines of that, and we'll decide on the best approach possible, whether we need to embed something with regards to STIR within this draft or propose an extension as and when some of the STIR stuff becomes mature and all of the cogs to that framework have been ironed out. So I think I kind of am in agreement with what Mark just brought up right now.
Thank you. Jonathan, please go ahead.
Hey guys, so I'm obviously supportive of moving forward the draft. Couple comments. One is, Costa and everyone, I have a draft in a similar area at this IETF meeting that talks about high availability on SIP trunks. There's some overlap actually in the configuration data. There's a configuration mechanism defined in my draft as well. So I'd encourage you guys to take a look at that. And I'm happy to collaborate on it. And then the second comment is on the actual elements in the YAML. To me, there's two very different types of stuff in there. There's stuff that the SBC on the receiving end probably knows about and can easily create the configuration file from it. And then there's the stuff that's a little harder. The num range was the one in particular that struck me as quite a different story. And that relates to the STIR stuff. So my question / feedback is, to minimize the scope of the document to only be that which can easily be implemented, meaning the terminating SBC in the carrier side can basically generate this document trivially from its configuration. And if it's more than that, then push it out of scope for now so that this can actually get implemented and deployed. That's my main feedback.
Thank you.
Hey,
Costa?
Jonathan. Hey, Jonathan, one quick question though for Jonathan. I saw the draft that you put forward. I haven't read it, but is it problematic overlap or is it complementary?
It's mostly complementary. I mean, it just needs to be reconciled. The bulk of the draft is more on the HA mechanisms, and it requires a configuration of the set of IP addresses of the clusters in the instance. And so that piece defines a JSON document you fetch via HTTP. So, I mean, it's just a question of making sure that these things line up and they're either in, either. So I think it's mostly complementary, and we just have to reconcile these two. These are not like pick A or B. They're not like that. Okay. Yeah, obviously it'd be helpful, Jonathan, now that you put that out there, if you've got cycles, to just kind of keep an eye on this draft as it progresses. Yeah. Did you, I was quickly trying to scan through, is there something in the draft that enumerates the IP address set for the carriers? Is that call control? Right. Costa, yeah. Do you have that? The call control is the set of IP addresses? Yeah, I see that. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I'll send comments on the list. Basically, it overlaps with the call control field in the YAML file. So we either need to bring the couple additional parameters in my draft into this, or something like that. It's probably the right thing. Okay. Yeah, just perfect. Thanks, John. Okay.
Hey, Jonathan. Nice to see you here. So with regards to your comment on kind of simplifying stuff for service providers so that it's actually deployed and adopted, I agree. It certainly would be very difficult for a service provider to keep track of the DID range for every single enterprise that registers in. I was thinking it would make sense to make that specific parameter optional as opposed to remove it altogether. That was where I was leaning.
Well, I mean, my sense, again, it's like, keep it simple and, perfect is the enemy of the good. I think there's no shortage of stuff being worked on around passing around phone numbers and how we convey them as it relates to some of this stuff too. I think you just yank it. You can always extend it later, but get this thing done. And this way you don't have to worry about reconciling it with all that other stuff. But I don't feel that strongly.
Thanks.
Cullen, please go ahead.
I just had to unmute a few times and I finally got there. So just sort of on that comment of that number range stuff, I feel like there's sort of like, there's SIP trunks that are meant for like a call center to a bunch of different large carriers, or they're very different from one that's for a small PBX and a small business up to a service provider. And so maybe we probably need to talk a little bit more about those and whether the number ranges make sense in certain cases. I mean, for the small PBX case, then the carrier is allocating a very specific number range, and it's very well known, and it's it's generally like, here's your 50 numbers. So I think we probably, when thinking more back about those drafts, we probably just weren't really clear enough about what these all were and when you used them, when they were optional, when they made, and whether they help. I mean, like, let's not put stuff in here that's not needed, right? That was the whole idea, was simplify this. So I think we should just all get together and talk about those and see what makes sense.
Thank you. John Peterson, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of wondering, like, how automatable, and this is, I guess, part of that conversation, really are like telephone numbers. Like, I mean, it's, if an enterprise gets a block of like 50 telephone numbers, is the assignment of those numbers automatic, like to arbitrary, I guess is my point? Or, I mean, if you're only learning about what telephone numbers you've got from like an auto config with the service provider, like surely there's some like manual intervention that's to follow that, right? So I mean, I guess this is why I think I might be with Jonathan on this, and that I can imagine use cases where this might make sense, but like it's not like DHCP where it just doesn't matter what numbers you get, right?
Thank you. Jonathan, please go ahead.
Yeah, and to call on me, my point is not that there's too many numbers. It's that John makes another great point, which is the enterprise probably needs to take manual steps once they get the numbers. My point is the service provider, even if it's one number, I would be skeptical that it is very easy for a service provider to implement some software that magically produces that number in response to the HTTP GET request to get this document. Because again, the implementation model I have in mind is like, okay, you've got a carrier, they've got an SBC, it's terminating the call, someone's typed in the config into the CLI on this SBC. The phone numbers are stored elsewhere. I don't know where, and it's probably a disastrous mess. And maybe even the SBC doesn't know them. So the SBC could serve the HTTP GET request for the rest of this document, but not for the phone numbers, at least not easily in my opinion. So even if it's just one phone number. So I'm just suggesting keep it simple, and because they're hard to generate and they're difficult to consume, it feels like you just remove it.
Well, there's one thing that the SBC does know, and that is which incoming SIP requests it routes down the SIP trunk. And it uses the phone number to do that generally. So I don't know. I mean, I think we have to dig around this. I totally agree with Peterson's comment that it's not just like this is not like DHCP. Most definitely the case, right?
Colin, that is not how mine works actually, so that wouldn't work.
No, but that's what I'm talking about. The ones for small business SBCs, it would be how yours work, right? Like, I mean, how else would an SBC possibly work that was serving SIP trunks to a small business for incoming calls? And that's why I said I differentiated these two cases. But for that case, right, like the Microsoft small business, what was the SIP Connect spec, like all of that stuff, right? Like that stuff, yeah, it does sort of know, right?
It's configured as a trunk group parameter in the SIP URI as opposed to an actual phone number. I mean, the phone number might be in the SIP URI itself, in the to or request URI, but it's but the thing that determines where to send the call is possibly based on upstream trunk group definitions. That's how we do it, for example.
So, but if you had if AT&T had a bunch of customers and it had an incoming call to a given phone number, and it had to decide which one of those customers it sent the SIP invite to, right? Like it would use the phone number to route that.
Sure. In the self.
And that's the type of trunk we're talking about for that case. And what I don't think the draft makes any of that at all clear, right? I just think that's like, I'm not even saying we need that in the draft. I have no idea what's needed or not needed, but it just seems like that people were thinking of a different use case than the type of than SIP trunks that were for outbound calls or for very generic termination.
Thank you. Srikanth, you have a comment to that?
Yeah, I think when we were putting in the that particular field, what we were thinking about was a specific use case where sometimes what we've observed is when an enterprise doesn't when an enterprise doesn't send the right phone number, it gets rejected by the service provider. So because the service provider is pretty strict about what kind of numbers are being advertised by the enterprise. So that was a sort of use case that we had in mind. But yeah, I think it makes sense that if it's a mess and it does make it more complicated, then it could be something that we could amend in the draft. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, are there any other comments or questions? Well, I think that was a good discussion. We will confirm adopting the draft on the mailing list. And I guess we will bring this meeting to a close. Thank you, everyone.